And besides, it's like the song goes.
Gonna build that city on a hill. Someday those tears are gonna spill.
I'm not sure where to begin with this video. I guess a bias disclaimer is in order on this one. Bastion is among the greatest games I've ever played. Front to back, start to finish, it is undeniably a modern classic. And yet, few people I've met have played it to completion. Many have heard of it, but most have never given Bastion more than a cursory try. Which is a shame because it was the game that launched the careers of Supergiant Games and brought everyone Hades. Heck, it could be argued that Bastion is an early tech demo of their abilities. So let's take a trip down memory lane and meet at the Bastion. I'm going a little out of order on this one because I want to get to the soundscape as soon as possible. Don't get me wrong, Bastion's visual presentation is near immaculate, but Darren Korb is so damn good at his job. I think this soundtrack is among the best in video games and easily in my top 5. It is so good I have and will continue to use it as backing tracks in my videos, including this one. The soundtrack drives the tone of the game home. It makes every story beat land harder than the last. Korb's own words are the best descriptor for this album, calling it acoustic frontier trip hop. This is a soundtrack that is willing to mix a distorted electric guitar together with what sounds like a lap steel guitar and a drum machine. Not to mention the liberal use of banjo and harmonica in Spike and a Rail. Somehow it all comes out fantastic. Korb is a mad genius for making it all work. I could go on for hours about why this soundtrack is great. I heartily recommend you listen to it even if you've never touched Bastion. The soundtrack is wholly unique and there's nothing else quite like it or Korb's other work. Beyond the fantastic music, there is more to the amazing soundscape. Like potential Barry White love child Logan Cunningham, who voices the narrator, Rux.
Folks used to make pilgrimage here to pay their respects to Pith, the bull. Pith Orchard. Place is a dead end in more ways than one.
His gravelly voice provides context to what's happening in real time. He often provides the histories of locations you travel to and the names of creatures you fight. And it's all done in a style as if you were around a campfire at night, swapping stories. It helps to add to the steampunk western vibe that Bastion creates for itself. The only other voice actor is that of Zia, and she is played by Ashley Barrett, the singer of Build That Wall. Her mic quality is obviously different, but with a small game, you make do with what you have. Sound is of course only half of the presentation. Visually, Bastion is played from a third-person, almost isometric view. The world has crumbled with the calamity, and the visuals reflect that. The level is being built underneath you as you play. Every monster or bit of environment is finely detailed and in my opinion set a standard for indie games. And it's all done in a 2.5D style using 3D models and 2D backgrounds. When you really sit and stare at it, Bastion's visuals are fairly simple. There's minimal lighting and art for cutscenes. But everything is done with such a specific style in mind that I can't help but appreciate the visual look. The team knew what they wanted and accomplished it. Because what's really fascinating is the world that Bastion takes place in. It is some kind of western steampunk Victorian world, and that is reflected in the environments you travel through. The environmental design is killer and each area has its own distinct visual theme. It gives each level character and makes them really stand out from one another. My only complaint in the department of optics is with the kid's model. It feels off when not in combat. Like it almost has too many frames of animation compared to everything else. It is a bit of a nitpick, but at the same time, I am staring at this character for hours. If you couldn't tell by now, Bastion is dripping with style. But usually things of this nature have style over substance. And I think this is a problem that Bastion ultimately suffers from because Bastion's weakest point is its gameplay. Which, to be fair, is fun. It's just not as impressive as the rest of the game. The gameplay centers on completing levels for cores or shards to power and upgrade the titular Bastion. The Bastion serves as a central hub that you return to after every level. There are a number of buildings, each with their own special purpose. More on them later. You travel to the levels via the Skyway, which is a fancy name for the level select screen. Levels are filled with enemies, side paths, and collectibles. Some levels are weapon challenges that reward you with upgrade materials and new skills. There's a variety of enemies, and they're introduced across Bastion's 3 main acts, as it were. But by the 75% mark, you've seen all the enemy types this game has to throw at you. It can make that last quarter feel less like a victory lap and more of a chore to complete, if not for the story. The combat is fairly simple, with a button to roll, a button to drink Mountain Dew Baja Blast for health, 2 buttons to fight with, a special skill button, and a button to block. There isn't a ton of depth in these controls, and as a result, the enemies aren't that complicated either. An annoying PC quirk I experienced is having to change the controls from mouse and keyboard to controller each time the game is launched. I don't know why it does this, just that it's replicable. Most of the depth from the gameplay comes not from the enemies you fight, but from the weapons you fight them with. There are 11 weapons to be found in the game. They include a mixture of melee and ranged options. 2 of these weapons can be used at the same time, each with having their own dedicated button. The game encourages you to mix and match these weapons to see what combo you would like best. The 2 weapons that really carried me through the game were the hammer and the dueling pistols. The hammer is great for dealing out close range damage. As said before, it carried me through the entire game. Makes sense since it's the kid's oldest friend. The Fang repeater is alright. I used it for a majority of my original playthrough in 2012, but upon using it now, I was less than impressed. High fire rate, but low damage and capacity. The bullhead shield isn't really a weapon so much as a defensive option, but this is the order in which the game gives you things. It's most useful for keeping yourself alive and countering enemies. The Breaker's bow requires precision shots, but when they land, they deal major damage. It was my choice of ranged weapon for the early game. The War Machete is the antithesis of the hammer. Whereas the hammer deals a lot of damage at once, the machete deals a lot of damage over time. It's very fast to use and was my choice of melee weapon in my original playthrough. You can even throw it too. The scrap musket is a boomstick. It shoots things up close good. The dueling pistols are personally godlike. There's nothing quite like rolling around a boss popping off shots as you go. The Brusher's Pike is a long-range stabbing device. Though if you miss, the recovery animation is fairly long and you can take damage in the meantime. This boyo is flingable as well. The Army Carbine deals massive amounts of damage, but also takes time to aim. It's a great option for a ranged-only build. I accidentally had to do that in my playthrough when I picked up the rifle and it went into my hammer slot. Flame bellows are pretty meh if I'm being honest. It's a flamethrower and not a very flashy one at that. The steampunk aspect of it is rad, but the damage just isn't there for me. The Galleon mortar is a weird one. Not many games will just give you a mortar. You charge up the distance you want the shot to go until it hits its maximum. Then the spot will go boom. The slow fire rate and weird controls generally turn me off from this weapon. I like the Calamity Cannon. It is a giant rocket launcher. It destroys pretty much anything in its path, which is probably why you get it for the last 2 levels. All of the aforementioned weapons have a special skill. These special skills use Black Tonic as a resource to prevent the player from using them all the time. The grenade is my personal favorite to use. All of these skills can be equipped at the Arsenal, the first building I'm going to discuss. It functions as an armory where you can choose your weapons in between levels. It's a necessity, which is why it's the first building you receive. From there on, you have some choices to which buildings to build and upgrade. The following order is none particular other than my own. The Foundry is where you go to upgrade your weapons. Each upgrade costs an upgrade material and an amount of the shard-based currency this civilization uses. The upgrades are treated like levels, with each level having 2 interchangeable upgrades. These are substantial and can completely change how you play with a weapon. The Distillery is where you can apply perks in the form of various wacky spirits. There are 10 perk slots in total, with you earning a perk slot for every level your character gains. This seems to be the only application of the character experience mechanic in the game. The perks are varied and allow for a couple of different styles of play. I personally like the one that gives me more Baja Blast flasks. The Lost and Found is a shop. It is where you can buy upgrade materials, skills, perks, and idols. I can't help but wonder who I'm giving all of these crystals. Is Rux the shopkeeper? Or is the kid such a goody two-shoes that he has to compensate for what he takes? Normally, I'm all for this behavior, but the apocalypse is an okay time to just start taking things you need. The Shrine is where you can apply difficulty modifiers in the form of invoking different gods. These deities are unlocked by finding or purchasing their idols. The effects range from enemies dealing more damage, to enemies healing, to having enemies' hits slow the player. Each of these idols adds percentage modifiers to the amount of XP and shards that you earn. The Vigil is the last building, and it serves as a challenge/quest hub. By completing these objectives, you will be rewarded with shards to spend on upgrades and items. Every challenge has what appears to be pencil sketches of characters and items in the game. Honestly, I think they might be repurposed artist sketches. Overall, while I think the gameplay and combat are the weakest parts of Bastion, it is still a lot of fun to play. And when you've completed the game, there is an option for a time attack mode and a New Game Plus mode. For this playthrough, I did a New Game Plus run to get some extra footage. And something I noticed on that run is actually how fast you can get through the game. It is actually kind of shocking how little of the combat is necessary. I was able to skip past entire parts of levels by just running past enemies. It seems to me something that might have been overlooked and contributes to another playthrough of Bastion feeling much different than your first. The story is fascinating. It is drip-fed to the player through the game, but is intricately tied to the gameplay as well. Rux the narrator talks about what the player does in real time, all while adding character to the world. Like how Caelondia, the city in which the game and story are centered around, is apparently a breakaway nation from a much larger motherland across the sea. Or how all the cores and shards that power the world were found in this one cave. In fact, the money you use also comes from this cave too, if my hunch is correct. Our main character is only known as the Kid, and he's a silent protagonist, but his actions are certainly louder than words. There's a lot to talk about, and the rest is going to have to be behind spoiler tags. For those who want to avoid spoilers, let me just say that I think you're doing yourself a favor. This is a story best experienced on your own. If you want to avoid spoilers, go here. Alright, like any proper story, we start at the beginning. Bastion starts out with the Kid waking up like any day, only this day starts out high in the sky. The calamity has occurred, and the world as it was is gone. The Kid must start anew in the ruins of the old world with a handful of survivors. The survivors include Rux, a mancer who designed the Bastion, Zulf, an Ura ambassador to Caelondia, and Zia, the daughter of an Ura scientist. Things are going well with the Kid exploring the ruins of the world for cores to power the Bastion. But things take a turn when Zulf and Rux get into a heated argument. See, Caelondia and the Ura people don't get along. The Caelondians are newcomers to this land, and the Ura are the indigenous. Conflict was an inevitability, and many years before the game, a war was fought. It was bloody from what little information we have. But the war did end, and peace eventually reigned. But Caelondia knew peace wouldn't last forever, so the Mancers put their best minds together to find a way to stop another war from happening. The solution they found was horrifying. The solution was the Calamity. Only the calamity that occurred wasn't the one that was planned. Originally, the calamity was only going to affect the Tassel Terminals, the home of the Ura. But the man who made the machine had other plans. He was an Ura who wanted no part in the destruction of his own people, and designed a device to backfire. He wrote all this information down in a journal that would be carried by his daughter Zia, and decoded by Zulf. Now Zulf's anger here is completely justified. He had worked his whole life to try to create a lasting peace between his people and Caelondia. Meanwhile, Caelondia had been planning to annihilate the Ura the whole time. Rux obviously tried to justify his people's unjustifiable actions, and Zulf snapped. He smashed up part of the Bastion good and left to find his people. With the Bastion in disarray, the Kid has to search the wilderness for shards. These are stones less powerful than the cores that were used by Caelondia to expand the borders of the city. The first half of the game takes place within those boundaries. The back half takes place in the wilds. The environmental design is wildly different from earlier in the game. Everything is overgrown and crawling with wildlife. Some of this wildlife even made their own bastion around a shard. Eventually, the Kid meets Zulf again in the quarry. Zulf warns the Kid not to go back to the Bastion. It's under siege, you see, and by none other than the Ura, a sign that the Calamity really did fail after all. The Kid manages to fight off the Ura, but it came at a price. Bastion is corrupted, and Zia is missing. The kid makes a 7-day journey through the wild for the last shard, only to have it stolen out from underneath him by the Ura. The kid decides it's high time to go after Zia. Turns out she wasn't kidnapped after all. She went willingly. Easy to understand, she wanted to be with her people. But as it turns out, her people want nothing but revenge, and see Zia as a traitor. So she returns to the Bastion. Zia just can't stay away from her apocalypse family. The kid has only one place left to go, the Tassel Terminals, where the Ura have taken the final shard. See, the Ura are desperate and pull out all the stops to keep the kid from his goal. This final area features a jump that has been added to your roll, as well as a giant battering ram. Now this is an insane weapon that the kid can carry, and annihilates pretty much anything in his path. It's about here where some bombs in the story are dropped upon us. We learn that the narration has been a campfire story between Rux and Zia. They have nothing left to do but wait for the kid to return and are swapping stories to wait out the time. It's a wonderful little surprise that cements this as a favorite for me. Rux also tells Zia about how the Bastion was designed not just for evacuation, but as a hard reset. See, the cores and the shards apparently captured the essence of the past. The Bastion uses their power to turn the world back to how it was. Once the kid has grabbed the last shard, he fights his way out of the Tassel Terminals. He comes across Zulf, whom is being beaten by his own people. You've got the choice to take him or leave him. Leave him and fight your way out with the battering ram. Take him and the kid slings Zulf over his back. He still has to get through the same enemies, only they stop firing when they see a Ceylondian helping someone that the Ura have abandoned. They watch silently as the kid leaves. The choice made over Zulf has no real bearing on the ending. The only major difference is whether he's in the ending picture or not. It is ultimately a choice by the player whether to save or abandon this character. Personally, I saved Zulf in my original playthrough. I ultimately don't think he's a bad person, only one blinded by anger. I'd like to think that Zulf was able to grow as a person and understand that the kid may be Ceylondian, but he is not Ceylondia. He's only responsible for his actions, and not those of others. With the Bastion fully powered, it all comes down to a single choice. Should I stay, or should I go? Stay and explore the shattered world, or go back to the way things were? The game acknowledges the fact that making things go back to how they were might not be a solution in the end. Who is to say that a calamity won't just happen again? New Game Plus even acknowledges this with you hearing the last words Rex says.
I'll see you in the next one.
The ending I've always preferred is the one where the Bastion becomes an airship. The world may be shattered, but there could be other survivors. At the end of it all, the kid has worked hard, so he's earned some rest. Now there's a lot of intricacy to this story that I've glossed over in the interest of time. Seriously, I had a section about how the song Zia sings is a cultural response by the Ura to Ceylondia building a wall to keep them out. And the story still managed to become about a third of the script. In fact, while writing the script, a friend of mine made a very good point. Lore and world building are important tasks separate from writing a storyline. A good story is made better by a good setting. I absolutely adore this game's story, and if I've spoiled all of it for you, I still think you should experience it for yourself. In conclusion, Bastion is deserving any and all praise it has received over the years. There's nothing quite like it in the world, to the point that I think Supergiant has not been able to capture the spirit of this game again. Not to say that their other titles are bad, I just don't think they have the focus that Bastion did, and instead rely upon replayability. All of this is to say, shut up and play Bastion. I'm sure a lot of people already own it, and it goes on sale for like $7, or is $15 full price if you have the cash to spare for a fantastic indie dev. Thanks for watching. Oh shit, my mic's been on this whole time.